Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Surface. The Healthcare Surfaces Institute was founded 9 years ago to examine a frequently overlooked foundational factor in the spread of HAIs. Over these years, we've gained valuable insight and effectively highlighted how surfaces and products can support and harbor microbes, along with the challenges healthcare professionals have encountered when attempting to clean and disinfect them. I'm Linda Liebert, the Executive Director of Healthcare Surfaces Institute. On our podcasts, we will interview healthcare experts, patients, thought leaders, researchers, and many others about the challenges we face in our ongoing battle to mitigate the spread of microbes that cause HAIs and solutions that are being introduced. So welcome back, Rodney. It's always a pleasure to have you as a guest.
Thanks so much.
Today we're going to talk about biofilm formation. And I'm going to just turn it over to you and have you explain what biofilm is.
Sure, that's great. So let's talk about biofilms. In one of our last episodes, we've kind of talked about how microbes attach to surfaces. And we talked about really the big three microbial groups of bacteria, fungi, and fungi include both yeast and molds are going to be the types of things that we tend to deal with biofilm attachments. It could also happen with certain viruses and other microorganisms, but let's just approach it as biofilm, okay? So what is biofilm? I want you to think of biofilms as this very gelatinous, kind of jelly-like material. It's often referred to as kind of a sticky extracellular polysaccharide matrix. Let's throw that out there. EPS.
That is.
Extracellular means it's outside of the bacterial cell. It's secreting it, Linda. And it's very much a matrix. Polysaccharide, if you know a little bit about saccharide or monosaccharide, you think sugars. And so it's just this sticky cellular matrix, like gelatinous material, like slime. In fact, biofilms are often called slime kind of as well. And so, many people know what these are and they don't even realize it. They form on your teeth, right? It's why you brush your teeth to remove the biofilm. They can form on rocks, like in water beds or rivers, and they get real slimy feeling. That's a biofilm. So it's a very natural way for microbes to prosper and attach. And in reality, the next step of thinking about a biofilm is it's a community. And so once that thing solidifies, it almost becomes a three-dimensional mass. Remember, it's invisible a lot of times to your eyes, but it's still there. And within that, you can have these channels. So think about trenches and channels kind of throughout this mass of gelatinous material. And some research and some people like to talk about these masses as being smart communities, which is kind of terrifying because what's going on there is these bacterial cells. And again, it can be polymicrobial. It can be different types of bacteria living in this community. And now you've got this ability for them to share information in kind of these trenches. So sometimes when I talk about this to people, I kind of talk about the old idea of trench warfare, that these bacteria or fungus or whatever are kind of behind this shield of jelly material, and they're creating tunnels and they're creating trenches. And they can share all sorts of things. For example, they can deliver nutrients across this matrix. They can get rid of waste byproducts. They can grow and grow. And they can even do something called, they can seed. They're called persister cells. So they're kind of hidden under this mass. And coming back to our topic of cleaning and disinfection, sometimes it's hard to get that thing removed. Think about a sink drain, or think about even a dry surface. You can have both wet and dry surface biofilms. And the idea now is that instead of just a regular bacterium sitting there on a surface that you can clean off, it's basically got a kind of a vest, a bulletproof vest, if you will. It's protecting the whole colony. So you could hit it with disinfectant, you could hit it with some type of physical process, and you might remove some of it. You might kill some of the bacteria, but what's problematic with time is this little community, they can kind of sink down and they can hide and be somewhat effective from that action, and then they can recolonize, they can reestablish once you don't clean. So again, to your point, it's almost impossible to constantly clean, clean, clean. And so once you step away, bacteria, if you give them 4 hours, they double every 20 or 30 minutes. And so if there's 100 left, it's 200, 400, 800, 1600. It doubles up really quickly. And now you have another smart community. And it can literally, they can break away and be seeded from travel, from patient hands, healthcare hands. They could touch something and move it to another part of the hospital. And these guys are so dangerous, Linda, that if they're forming on devices like a catheter or an IV tube or some other medical device, you could even be on full scale, broad spectrum antibiotic therapy, and they're just hammering the patient. And you might knock down the infection somewhat, but if those biofilms aren't removed from whatever device is in your body, they're just going to reestablish. So very dangerous, very problematic. And within those communities, in a moment, we can also remind everyone that if they're resistant, antimicrobial resistant, they're sharing those resistance genes across those communities. So just a kind of a difficult and problematic issue in the environment.
So a couple of things that we talk about when we talk about the surfaces. A lot of times people say, well, we clean high touch surfaces. And I always say if you only focus on the high touch surfaces, you're missing the highly touched surfaces. And those are areas where this biofilm could start to form, right? Um, and and so we talk a lot about that. We also talk about the multimodal solutions. So one disinfectant may not be the answer, but if you're using multiple forms of disinfection and possibly UV, that may be able to kill it. So there is research that's going on, but one of the things I really want to clearly state here is that there is not a silver bullet.
Right.
There is not one solution. It's a combination of manually cleaning and a variety of different types of disinfecting processes. But the goal, bottom line, is to use materials where the microbe's going to have a difficult time attaching to begin with.
Right.
It gives us more time to clean and disinfect.
Right. I mean, if you just start there, right? Let's bring it back to the point we're trying to make. If you can think about the materials and the surfaces that are in these facilities, again, there may not be a perfect solution, but you certainly can be thinking about surfaces and materials that are at least more resistant than, say, carpet. I mean, everybody knows that's a horrible thing to put into to anywhere in a healthcare setting, but you can certainly choose and work with individuals like this particular organization here that Linda's helping represent to think about this, to think about it so that at least you don't make it easy for the bacteria to create these biofilms. You're still probably going to deal with stuff. To her point, it's very complex. There are so many types of disinfectants and robots and UV and hypochlorous acid and just on and on and on. And I think we would both agree that we're really not here to promote or hammer any individual thing. We're here to promote education and understanding around how to use different types of agents and different types of physical cleaning methods so that we make the healthcare environment safe for the patient. That's our ultimate goal.
Exactly. The built environment is so critical, and it's often not looked at. I have an example that you and I have talked about in the past where they discovered aspergillosis in the operating rooms of a children's hospital. And they had several deaths, and they went on a search to try and find it, and eventually found it in the drywall of the operating rooms, and it had actually spread. One of the challenges that many times our architectural and design community will run into is they will specify a material, and I'm green board as an example. And then in order to save money, because the general contractor doesn't have the knowledge and understanding of microbes and what could happen, they switch a product out, which is the case that happened here. And so they really set up the ability for microbes to attach, biofilm to form, colonies, and this ultimately begins to spread. And again, we can't see it. So we
Right.
don't know where it is, and we don't know what we need to do to get rid of it. And so it truly becomes a challenge for a healthcare setting. And the other fact is that we can't see it. You can't walk into a room and do a visual inspection and say, yep, it's clean, and then walk out. And do we
Yeah.
run around with a microscope all the time to check? Not necessarily, but there are new products always coming out where we can do an assessment of the environment to see what is there. Um, so
Absolutely. I mean, what a tragic and not only a tragic and sad story about the aspergillosis problem, just for the audience, Aspergillus is a genus of a particular fungal organism. It's a mold. So sometimes if it grows long enough, it was probably in the drywall hidden because it can think about fungus can spread out these things called hyphae. They're little filaments like hairs, and they can grow all over the place. In fact, they grow underground. That's how mushrooms pop up in different places. It's subterranean and they pop up. Same thing happens in drywall. Same thing happens in clothing. Same thing happens on your shower curtain. It doesn't matter. Mold can grow almost anywhere. They also produce biofilm. And so it makes sense that they didn't really understand what was going on until probably someone started considering an environmental source for the outbreak. And then you might start doing some culturing and surface selection and trying to figure out what's going on. But it's also a great educational study that you brought up for us to think about, right? Drywall. I mean, who would think to think about drywall? But it could be any of those things. It could be curtains. It could be drywall. It could be different types of material. It might be wooden. You might not even expect biofilm to be growing on some of these types of surfaces, and yet, as we continue to tell you, microbes are the most adaptable organism in the world. They're the most diabolical. They outsmart us all the time, and we're just doing our best to try to keep up with them. And so, to your point, you know, thinking about that up front, always putting the microbe in your mind first. And then you might have to, unfortunately, educate. For example, in this case, perhaps a choice was made. Maybe it wasn't a smart economical choice at the time, but guess what? That probably cost that hospital on all sorts of issues on the backside. You know, I often tell people it's easy to save money up front, but what you don't always realize is on the back end, patient infections, healthcare associated, it can ruin your reputation. It could cost you literally millions and who knows what types of lawsuits that might come against you in those types of situations. So it makes sense to think about this up front.
well, and on the patient side, which we've been doing quite a bit of, the Institute has been doing quite a bit of talking with patients and survivors and
Right.
families that have lost loved ones. It's really about that patient. We need to be able to go to a healthcare facility and get well, right? Or
Right.
be treated so we can get well.
Right.
And it seems that more and more we're finding out that maybe it's not so safe. But in real life, that may not necessarily be true. We don't want stop telling people to go to the hospital if you need
Yeah.
care. You
Yeah.
would have
Right. I
to be
mean,
proactive.
it's absolutely it's a problem. We know it's there. I, I would I would probably bet that almost in every situation, healthcare professionals, people that care for you are doing their best to care for you and do the best to prevent infections. But when they don't know what's going on in the environment, it's really out of their hands at that point. I mean, they could be doing everything right, Linda. Everything could be done right. And you still could have a loved one that picks up an infection because you just didn't realize that something was there in that room or on that device. And again, that's not meant to scare people, but it is an important thing to be educated about and to think about when you are entering a healthcare facility.
Right. And one of the things we also talk about is you can be proactive, washing your hands, giving one of the things that was interesting with the patient that I was an advocate for was she was non-ambulatory, so she only had her hands washed once a day. And so, I was giving her washcloths and things like that to, do it repeatedly, but thinking about hand hygiene. And then for those environmental services professionals, and of course, this is an area we've been working on too, is the amount of time you allot an
Right,
environmental services professional to actually clean a room,
right,
not enough time.
right,
So a lot of times empowering them to say, you know what, I'm just not comfortable with how this area was cleaned and I'd like to have 15 or 20 more minutes.
right,
Um, or an area where there's high turnover, an operating room or an emergency department. They need the time because they are trained to be skilled at being aware of what's going on in the environment. And then you want to empower them to be able to say, hey, wait a minute, I just need, to do a little extra due diligence here. And so the
yeah, I
time.
mean, it's such a critical thing. And I know this is it's still in the topic, which is really important. And you and I are both, very passionate about this, really promoting and working with those EVS professionals and infection preventionists and others that are there to help you. And it shouldn't be butting heads, right? It should be a collective effort to make your family member, your loved one as safe as possible. So yes, sometimes it might mean giving them the time, to do what they need to do right. Even in the public right now, I was talking about this the other day online with someone. There's an outbreak of flus going around. It's respiratory season right now. Uh, there's always COVID that's still popping around. And now we have norovirus, which is a nasty gastrointestinal fast acting infection. But but norovirus cannot be killed by hand sanitizers because of its makeup. And so you need to actually wash with soap and water, warm water, to remove those norovirus particles. But hand sanitizers may work for influenza and other types of things. So even in a healthcare setting or in the public, these are educational moments. You have to let people know that sometimes just slapping a bunch of alcohol and stuff on your hand may not actually be enough. You might actually need to wash your hands with soap and water to remove things that will not be impacted by alcohol. So surfaces, these are surfaces, and so are hospital surfaces. So you've got to have the proper education, you've got to have the proper materials, you got to have the proper individual to clean those surfaces. And all of those, again, are multimodal in our opportunity to create a safe environment.
Right. I remember the very first summit that we had many, many years ago, 9 years ago now,
Yeah,
where we all sat in a room. And when I say we brought infection preventionists, we brought microbiologists and virologists. And I mean, there were 30 different areas of expertise that came and sat in a room and had a conversation, much like you and I are,
yep,
that all of a sudden there were aha moments going, oh, that's why it didn't work, which is one of the
yep,
reasons why the Institute continues to hold a summit on an annual basis so we can bring those people together and say, okay, this didn't work or this didn't work. You need that collaborative effort of all of these experts from a variety of different areas of expertise to really look at what are the multimodal solutions.
right.
How can
And
we address?
to re-educate people. I mean, we're all human. We all make mistakes. We forget things really easily. It's easy to kind of get tired of doing things, right? I mean, we're all subject to that. So it's just an opportunity to constantly remind people and re-educate people that it does matter. It does matter how you clean this room or how you handle your hand hygiene or whatever the situation is. You have to, and you even have to remind experts, right? You have to constantly remind everybody's prone to doing things maybe an easier or faster way, and that's not always the best way.
Yeah, exactly. So to summarize, solutions are multimodal.
Yep.
We cannot see microbes. And so a visual inspection of an area or a room does not mean it's microbial clean.
Correct.
Cleaning and disinfecting is not just about one person going into a room cleaning and disinfecting. It means everybody is part of that solution, including the patient and their visitors.
Correct.
And biofilm can form anywhere. So as we look at the surfaces issue, it's very possible, as you mentioned in a previous podcast that we did together, we may have to replace a surface because we can no longer clean it. And those are all things that the Healthcare Surfaces Institute is working on. And I would like to thank you again, Rodney, for being a part of this and for being part of the summit. You're one of our founding advisors. So you've been with us the whole 9 years.
I have, and it seems, time flies. It seems like yesterday we were sitting in that room together, and I thank you, and I thank the team that continues to fight this fight. It'll probably be a forever fight, but hopefully going forward, we will find ways to continue to educate people and get on board and make everybody's healthcare and community experience safer and healthier.
Definitely. Well, thank you again for your time, and I'm sure we'll see you again.
We look forward to it. Everybody take care and be safe.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Surface. This podcast is brought to you by ISSA, the Worldwide Cleaning and Facility Solutions Association. Please subscribe and write a review for us on whatever platform you enjoyed this podcast on. For more information, go to healthcaresurfacesinstitute.org.